In May 1977, Jock Stein guided his rebuilt Celtic team to yet another League and Scottish Cup double, their 6th in 12 years under the manager who had transformed the club from perennial domestic strugglers to one of the giants of the European game in the late 60s and early 70s. An escalating series of misfortunes had combined to prevent them reaching a third European Cup final, and eventually had torn the heart from the side in the middle part of the decade, as age caught up with the stars of the late 60s, and players like Lou Macari, Davy Hay and George Connolly, who had been expected to form the backbone of the side into the 1980s, slipped through Stein's despairing fingers. The 2 seasons either side of Stein's horrific car crash in the summer of 1975 had ended a glorious era for Celtic, Rangers taking advantage to win 2 consecutive league titles and 4 trophies out of 6 in those 2 difficult seasons. The manager's return to duty in May 1976 and his rapid rebuilding of the side then signalled the beginning of a mini-renaissance that saw hopes rise that Celtic would reassert the dominance of the Scottish game that had been established at the beginning of the Stein era. But any hopes that Celtic's great series of misfortunes in this damned decade was now over would be disabused by the events of August to October 1977. These would be the final blows from which Jock Stein's Celtic would never recover. At the beginning of season 1976-77, all of Celtic's hopes rested on the 2 remaining genuinely world-class players of the Quality Street gang, Danny McGrain and Kenny Dalglish. A new generation of talent was emerging in the shape of Roy Aitken, Tommy Burns and George McCluskey, and to these, Stein added astute signings in Pat Stanton and Joe Craig. Without these last 2, ineligible after playing for Hibernian and Partick Thistle respectively in the earlier rounds, Celtic lost a League Cup final to Aberdeen on the 6th of November 1976, their 6th League Cup final defeat of the decade in their 13th consecutive final appearance. It was a defeat as frustrating as any Celtic suffered in the competition that decade, with poor finishing costing them the trophy.
Pointing to the penalty spot. Javier was looking quite mortified by the whole business. Almost an echo of that game at Batodre 3 weeks ago. Almost 12 minutes of the match gone. That's it. Kenny Dalglish. 1-0 for Celtic. Kennedy.
Doug Bailey wrote in the Sunday Post of the 7th of November 1976. In the end, the cup went north, and Ali MacLeod will probably be presented with an oil rig or 2 for planning such a momentous victory. I wouldn't be surprised to see him blushing if that happens. Aberdeen didn't so much win the cup, it was more a case of Celtic throwing it away. For in the second half, with the score at Peels and the Dons looking a ragged lot, Jock Stein's lads put them through the mill, and how? But, unfortunately for the Celtic fans, the team's finishers were not finishing. I lost count of the number of times Wilson and Doyle were sent clean through and got in shots and headers which were about as near the target as I was. As disappointing as this defeat was, it was quickly followed by a run of form that would set Celtic up to regain the league title. 3 days before Celtic visited Tynecastle on the 20th of November, Scotland played Wales at Hampden in a World Cup qualifier, in which Danny McGrain had not only blotted out the threat of the dangerous Welsh winger Leighton James, he also proved to be Scotland's main attacking threat, creating the only goal of the match with a cutback for Kenny Dalglish, whose backheel flick was diverted into his own net by Welsh defender Ian Evans. In the second half, one amazing 70-yard run saw Danny take possession on the edge of the Welsh penalty area, only to be brought down as he tried to round the keeper Di Davis. Incredibly, no penalty was awarded.
Evans. Green just keeps on running and wins it. Oh, that's it. Oh, well.
In the Evening Times of the 18th of November 1976, David Stirling wrote, "Scotland's players can now get back to domestic business. Willie Ormond can settle down with a deserved new contract. And Danny McGrain is magic." This was to be the greatest season of McGrain's career, and he proved how magic he could be in a 7-goal thriller at Tynecastle as Celtic came from 2-0 and 3-1 down to snatch a vital win in the final moments.
And scoring! Shaw to Park. Thinking about a shot, and it's a goal! 2 goals in 2 minutes, and Hearts have taken a remarkable 2-0 lead. McGrain. Dalglish with the back header. Celtic pull one back. Ronnie McDonald. Craig to Dalglish. Beautiful pass to Doyle. Blocked. And Shaw controlling it. Looking up, sees the man in the clear. Jim Brown's on the right. Unmarked. And a big gap here. Gibson coming to the near post. Busby at the far post. So's Prentice. Gibson, a hat-trick! Absolutely non-stop play from both sides. Even the free kicks are taken quickly. McGrain still there, prepared to go on his own. Dalglish, it must be! 3 minutes remaining. Lavin. Dalglish trying to knock it back. Jeffries. A chance for Dalglish, it's a tight angle and Wilson makes the save.
The goal to equalise the scoring at 3-3 was the result of Danny's skill and determination to reach the byline and once again cut the ball back for Dalglish to score. Mike Aitken wrote in The Scotsman of the 22nd of November 1976, "From a quickly taken free kick, McGrain made his way into the box. With body movements worthy of Jimmy Johnston, he must have sold Roy Kay 3 dummies before taking the ball to the byline. He cut it back to Dick Champion, saviour of the side. Kay Dalglish to you, and with all the time in the world, the Celtic captain placed his shot past 2 Hearts defenders." The winner came 3 minutes from the end when a Kenny Dalglish shot from a tight angle was sent spinning into the air by the goalkeeper, and Ronnie Glavin, with an acrobatic hitch kick, fired it home from close in. Hugh Taylor in the Daily Record of the 22nd of November 1976 was in no doubt where the credit for the Celtic victory lay. Another difference between Celtic and Hearts was the fact that the Parkhead team have at least 2 world-class players, Kenny Dalglish and Danny McGrain. I doubt if there's a better player than McGrain in Europe today. Not only is he the number 1 back, he's just about the best winger in the business. Dalglish, brilliant for Scotland against Wales, is again playing with a style and authority no other attacker can match. Celtic are playing in the modern manner. Like the Italians and the Germans, they mount their attacks from the back. And, of course, McGrain is the key man. The win at Tynecastle set Celtic up nicely for a midweek visit to Ibrox, where Rangers had drawn 1-1 with Hibernian as Celtic were winning in Edinburgh. They were still 4 points behind leaders Dundee United, but had 2 games in hand and were level on points with Rangers, who had played a game more. The match at Ibrox on the 24th of November 1976 would prove a pivotal moment in the season, but provided a mix of emotions. Joe Craig scoring a spectacular winning goal, while Bobby Lennox had his leg broken in a horror tackle by John Gregg. In a game that never really lived up to its billing, Celtic should have been further ahead than their 1-0 lead at half-time, and were angered by the officiating when Lennox was hacked down by Gregg after only 11 minutes. Mike Aitken wrote in The Scotsman of the 25th of November 1976. After 9 minutes, Kenny Dalglish picked up a loose ball on the left and his neat chipped cross was met at the near post by Ronnie Glavin. Goalkeeper Stuart Kennedy thought Glavin's back header was going safely over, but the ball dipped and struck the outside of the crossbar. There was confusion and controversy 2 minutes later when referee Eddie Thompson first awarded Celtic a penalty and then changed his mind after consultation with a linesman. Glavin had sent Lennox racing clear into the box, where he was brought down unceremoniously by John Gregg. A penalty, said the referee. But Rangers protested and pointed to the linesman on the far side, who had raised his flag for offside. Gregg had seemed to play Lennox on, but the referee accepted his linesman's decision and awarded Rangers a free kick. Dalglish, the Celtic captain, who had been waiting to take the penalty, showed his disgust by throwing the ball in the direction of the linesman. Lennox had to leave the field, injured, seriously as we discovered later, and was replaced by Paul Wilson. The goal Celtic's play deserved came in the 36th minute, and it was one fit to grace any match. Joe Craig scoring in his first appearance in the fixture with a superb shot on the turn into the top right corner. It was enough to seal a win that was, to say the least, a morale booster. It was Celtic's first win over Rangers since the 1st of January 1974, just short of 3 years before, and as Mike Aitken pointed out in his report for The Scotsman, only their 16th win at Ibrox of the 20th century. More importantly than the morale boost was the impact of the result on the league table. Jim Blair reported in the Evening Times of the 25th of November 1976. The full significance of Celtic's 1-0 win against Rangers last night at Ibrox may not be realised until around April of next year. Aberdeen permitting, the Old Firm will be breaking down the Premier League door round about then to get at the Championship trophy. 7 of the top 10 clubs have seen off a third of their 76-77 fixtures. Celtic haven't. They now sit, vulture-like, 2 points off the leaders, with a game in hand. But, what's more to the Old Firm point, they are 2 points ahead of champions Rangers, with that same game in hand. Admittedly, it's too soon yet to be saying who'll be where at the end of the season. That makes about as much sense as picking a winner after 6 fences in the Grand National. But the Old Firm are the course and distance winners in this particular event. The bookies see that too, which is why you can get 4-1 Aberdeen and 10-1 Dundee United for the title. Pre-season, I picked Celtic as my tip for the Championship, and I see no reason to alter that opinion. Certainly not after beating Rangers at Ibrox and ending a so-called 3-year hoodoo. Celtic's joy over what was a fairly comfortable win at Ibrox was tempered by the leg break suffered by Bobby Lennox, and at the age of 33 there was speculation in the press that it might signal the end of his long career. A smiling Buzzbomb, his right leg in plaster, was pictured on the back page of the Daily Record the following morning, exonerating John Gregg of any blame. Celtic star Bobby Lennox had a plea for the fans last night as he sat at home nursing his broken leg. Don't blame John Gregg. The 33-year-old veteran, whose leg was broken in a tackle with the Rangers captain in the Old Firm game at Ibrox, said, "I want the fans to know that the injury was absolutely accidental." Bobby and his wife Catherine were still able to smile last night after Celtic's 1-0 victory, but the injury must cast doubt on Bobby's career. The injury curtailed Lennox's season, but apart from a brief sojourn in the United States in 1978, he would see out the decade in a Celtic shirt, the only Lisbon Lion to play for the club into the 1980s. A 2-1 win over Kilmarnock at Celtic Park 3 days later, on the 17th of November 1976, marked the first time that season Celtic had won 3 league matches in a row. But they would play only 2 more matches before Christmas, as snow and freezing conditions forced a series of postponements. Ayr United were beaten 3-0 at Celtic Park on the 18th of December, a win which saw them go top of the league on goal difference for the first time that season, level on 19 points with Aberdeen, and Dundee United only a point behind in third. Christmas Day fell on a Saturday that year, but in a break with tradition, the weekend's matches were switched to Sunday and a top-of-the-table clash with Aberdeen. Not for the first time that season, Aberdeen proved a tough nut to crack, and the top two put on a superb exhibition on a rock-hard, frozen surface that had the pundits searching their thesauruses for superlatives. The Winter Wondermen was the headline in the Daily Record of the 27th of December 1976, as Hugh Taylor reported. The Premier League leaders staged a spectacular at Parkhead yesterday, which had the fans gasping right to the final whistle. The huge crowd could not have asked for more. Who cared about the snow-white surface? Not Celtic or Aberdeen. They gave winter football a tremendous boost in this fascinating contest. There were great goals, dramatic misses, and everything was spiced with skill and excitement. In a roller-coaster first half, Aberdeen twice took the lead through Drew Jarvie, and twice Celtic equalised with a double from Joe Craig. As in the League Cup final, Celtic had most of the play, but Aberdeen were dangerous on the break, and in the closing stages, either side could have taken both points. Hugh Taylor writing, "In the last minutes, Paul Wilson missed a glorious chance for Celtic, and with only seconds to go, Dom Sullivan saw his shot slither past the post." At this point in the season, Aberdeen were harbouring serious title ambitions of their own, and after their incredible 5-1 win over Rangers in the League Cup semi-final, it didn't seem out of the question that they might yet take it. Mike Aitken reported in The Scotsman of the 27th of December 1976. Celtic stay ahead of the pack by virtue of goal difference and share the leading total of 20 points from 14 games with Aberdeen. They also share a proficiency of skill and talent which no other Scottish sides can currently match, and it would be a brave man who would separate at this stage which of the two is likely to last the pace of the league better. Celtic and Aberdeen were joined on 20 points the following day by Dundee United, who drew 1-1 with Hearts at Tynecastle, but had played a game more than the other two. Celtic were due to play Motherwell at Fir Park on New Year's Day and Rangers at Celtic Park 2 days later, but again the winter freeze intervened and it was the 8th of January before they would play again in a hugely significant match at Tannadice against United, by which time Aberdeen had opened a 3-point gap, having played 2 games more. It was a classic game of two halves, with Celtic dominating the first period and taking the lead after only 12 minutes with a magnificent 20-yard volley from Kenny Dalglish into the top corner of Hamish McAlpine's net. Bill McFarlane wrote in the Sunday Post of the 9th of January 1977, "For the remainder of the first half, Celtic put United through the mill. Dalglish was superb, but for all their superiority, they could not find another way past United skipper McAlpine." The turning point of the match came when Dalglish missed a penalty 7 minutes into the second half. Mike Aitken reported in The Scotsman of the 10th of January 1977, "The miss obviously upset Dalglish. Celtic lost their rhythm, and seeing all was not against them, United took the game on and proceeded to batter forward for 20 minutes or so until McAdam finally got the breakthrough they wanted. His goal came from a corner on the right, taken by the ubiquitous Graham Payne in 74 minutes. The ball came to fullback Coppell, unmarked on the edge of the 18-yard area. He glanced it forward to McAdam, who thumped it into the net from around 3 yards to level Dalglish's first half score." There was a great deal of sympathy expressed for United in the press over the next couple of days as Celtic weathered the second half storm and broke away to score a sensational late winner, finished brilliantly by Johnny Doyle.
Stanton.
Bill McFarlane wrote in the Sunday Post, I'm sure even self-confessed Celtic fanatic Rod Stewart must have shed a tear for this oh-so unlucky United side. From his seat in the director's box, Rod could not hide his delight when Johnny Doyle broke away to score a dramatic winner just 4 minutes from the end. There were few tears shed amongst a Celtic support beginning to think this could be their year. Mike Aitken wrote in The Scotsman, "The green and white scarves went up around Tannadice like rifles over the heads of troops. That section of the 16,000 crowd who had made the journey from Glasgow broke forth into their anthem, 'We are sailing home again.' And even Rod Stewart, sitting in the director's box, must have been a little proud of the way his song has been adopted by the Celtic choir." The occasion for celebration was an away victory over fellow title challengers Dundee United, which brought Celtic within a point of leaders Aberdeen, and with a game in hand, they must feel it won't be long before they return to the perch they sat on for 9 seasons in a row. This impression was reinforced 3 days later with the visit of Rangers to a frozen Celtic Park on the 11th of January 1977. To protect the pitch, Celtic had covered it in a thick blanket of straw over the weekend. The pitch was cleared and sanded before kick-off, and in photographs from the match, large piles of straw can be seen all around the perimeter. The pitch was declared playable by referee Ian Foote, but it was still described by Hugh Taylor in the Daily Record of the 12th of January 1977 as a Siberian surface. This third league meeting of Glasgow's Big Two never hit the heights of the Boxing Day extravaganza against Aberdeen, and appeared to be heading for a goalless draw until Colin Jackson diverted the ball past his own keeper with 14 minutes remaining. Hugh Taylor reported, "Alex O'Hara needlessly conceded a corner kick during a burst of Celtic pressure. Paul Wilson took a quick short one to Andy Lynch. He crossed to Roddy MacDonald, and MacDonald's header seemed to be going towards keeper Stuart Kennedy, when unlucky Colin Jackson tried to head clear, but merely diverted the ball into his own net. Celtic fans went delirious with joy as a great gloom enveloped the Rangers' end. Undoubtedly, however, Celtic just deserved their narrow victory because of their second half showing. After the interval, they found their real rhythm and were in command for most of the game." On a night when defences were mostly on top, the match showed again the importance of Pat Stanton to this rebuilt side. Jim Blair reported in the Evening Times of the 12th of January 1977. "Rangers, who had 2 players booked inside 2 minutes, Tommy McLean and Tom Forsyth, relied a lot on finding the heads of Derek Johnston and Parlane, but with MacDonald winning heads down, this never came off. The big Celtic centre-half seems to have improved his game all round, and it's no coincidence that it's become apparent since Pat Stanton, Parkhead's cool-hand look, arrived on the scene. When you think of how Stanton and Joe Harper are performing for their new clubs, spare a thought for those poor Hibs fans." Now a point ahead of Aberdeen, and with a game in hand, Celtic went into overdrive, scoring 22 goals in their next 6 league matches, including a 4-2 win over Hibernian and a 5-1 thrashing of Hearts in successive weeks at Celtic Park in February, while progressing less smoothly in the Scottish Cup after replays in each round against Airdrieonians and Ayr United. By the time they next tasted defeat in the league, at Pittodrie on the 5th of March 1977, the result was almost lost in the shockwaves sent crashing over Scottish football by Jock Stein's latest foray into the transfer market. Former Rangers striker Alfie Conn, a member of the team that won the European Cup Winners' Cup in 1972, moved to Spurs in July 1974 and had won 2 full caps for Scotland in May 1975, the second in the infamous 5-1 defeat to England at Wembley. Despite enduring a difficult time in the First Division due to injuries, he was a firm favourite of the White Hart Lane crowd, but had now lost his place in the first team, mainly due to difficult relationships with first Terry Neal and then Keith Birkinshaw, after he had been signed by the legendary Bill Nicholson. Conn was the epitome of the 1970s football maverick. Instantly recognisable with his long wavy hair billowing behind him as he raced in on goal. The moustache and enormous sideburns, the shirt hanging loose over his shorts. He was a hugely talented individualist, but with a history of fractious relationships with managers, having left Ibrox under a cloud after a fallout with strict disciplinarian Jock Wallace. Rumours had been bubbling under the surface since the middle of February of a possible move to Celtic for Conn, and the news broke on the 2nd of March 1977. Ken Dalglish reported in that day's Daily Record, former Rangers star Alfie Conn last night signed for Celtic in what will be the most talked about signing since the war. Parkhead manager Jock Stein went to White Hart Lane last night to buy the 24-year-old Conn from Spurs in a £65,000 deal. And it means that Scottish international Conn is the first player in nearly 50 years to play for both members of the old firm. Conn remembers in his biography, What's It All About?, the Alfie Conn story, written with Jeff Holmes, of his fury at Birkinshaw on being substituted early in the second half in a reserve match against Hereford United on the 1st of March 1977. Enough was enough. He was getting both barrels. As I neared the dugout and was just about to let go, he said, "There's someone to see you in the office, Alf. Good luck, mate." That stopped me in my tracks. I smiled and headed straight up the tunnel and through the back to the office. From the angle I was approaching, there were no windows in the office, so I had no idea who was demanding to see me during a game. Automatically, you think of your wife and family. But when I opened the door, the first thing I spotted were the rosy cheeks of my former Scotland under-23 manager, and that was something I definitely hadn't been expecting. Jock Stein. Arguably the most revered manager in the history of the Scottish game. Now, this was quite something. Think curveball and multiply it by infinity. I smiled and said hello, and Jock returned the compliment. Was he just passing White Hart Lane and had decided to drop in for a chat about the old days? Nope. He said he had been given permission to use the manager's office, and in we went. First and foremost, I wasn't aware that Jock had been at the game, and my initial thought was that he had come all that way to watch a reserve match, and I took that as a big compliment. I was sat across the desk from this legend, and he said to me, "I'd love you to come to Celtic. I know it's a big deal and probably a lot to process, given the years and the success you had at Rangers, but for my part, I've spoken to the players and they're quite happy for you to come. I would like you to come." It was a surreal moment. Anyone who knows the history between Rangers and Celtic would immediately throw up 1,000 red flags. But take the two clubs out of the equation just for a moment and think Jock Stein. Think of his managerial qualities and the impact he'd had on me as my under-23 coach. It was a real question, and I answered it as best I could. "Well, if you want me to come, I'll come." Jock Stein turned out to be one of the few managers Alfie Conn wouldn't fall out with, and was signed initially for a month to prove his fitness before making the deal permanent. Quoting Jock Stein, Ken Dalglish concluded his report in the Daily Record of the 2nd of March 1977. "I am delighted that we have managed to get him. He will join the first team squad tomorrow and watch the game at Somerset Park. Then on Saturday, he will be in the first team pool against Aberdeen at Pittodrie." And Conn, the ex-Ibrox hero, whose name was being chanted by the Rangers fans in their last two home games, said, "I am over the moon to be coming back home. I had great respect for Jock Stein when he handled the Scotland under-23 side. I said then he was the best manager I had played under. I am not worried about the reaction of the Rangers fans. I just want to get on with my career." Such was Conn's respect for Stein. He appeared on the Daily Record the following morning, sporting a new clean-cut look, telling Ken Dalglish, "There is something special about Jock Stein. For a start, I don't think there is any other manager I'd have had my hair cut for and my beard and moustache taken off. He didn't order me to do it, just said that my hair was a bit long. That was enough for me. Off it came, beard and all." Alfie made his debut for Celtic as a second-half substitute in the 2-0 defeat at Pittodrie on the 6th of March 1977. His new look, including having his shirt tucked in, no doubt on Stein's orders. Aberdeen had the Indian sign over Celtic this season, managing to win despite once again being second best on the run of play. But by now, they were well out of the title race, 6 points behind Celtic even after their win, with Rangers in second place, 5 points behind despite having played a game more. 4 days later, Conn made his first start for the club in a 2-1 win over Partick Thistle at Celtic Park, where his every touch was cheered to the rafters, and he responded with a clever goal to open the scoring just before half-time. Jim Reynolds reported in the Glasgow Herald of the 7th of March 1977. Then, with 4 minutes left to the interval, the Parkhead terraces erupted as Conn announced his arrival with a tremendous opportunist goal. Craig took the ball way out on the left and spotted Conn running through the middle into open space. The Celtic centre flighted a perfect ball and Conn, taking it in his stride, cleverly flicked it away from Rough into the net. The other scorer that night was Johnny Doyle, who, more than anyone else, made Conn feel welcome in the dressing room on his first day at the club. In his biography, he remembers the first time he came to Celtic Park as a Celtic player. When I walked into the dressing room for the first time, there was one voice I heard above all others, that of Rangers' nemesis Johnny Doyle. His first words to me were, "Here he is, the current bun." What an icebreaker. He was one guy I really hit it off with, and we would go on to have a great relationship. In all the time I knew him, I think he only called me Alf just the once. I said to him, "Should I be worried?" Johnny christened me the current bun, and not once did I take offence. He became one of my best mates at Celtic, and beyond my time there. Before Conn had time to properly settle at Celtic Park, the last league clash of the season with Rangers took place on the 19th of March 1977, and the 2-2 draw that day left Celtic almost certainties to regain the title for the first time in 3 years. Conn remembers in his biography taking a wrong turn on his way into the stadium. I naturally turned right to head to the home dressing room, and all I heard was, "Hey, current bun, wrong way." Johnny, who wore a Celtic scarf to every match, pointed to the left. Next minute, he walks over to me, thrusts his scarf into my hand and said, "Take that into the dressing room for me." And in a flash he was gone. And I'm left standing in the foyer at Ibrox, holding a Celtic scarf. Without the injured Andy Lynch and Roddy McDonald, Celtic should have been out of sight by half-time after Roy Aitken gave them a 12th-minute lead, latching on to a low-driven shot by Ronnie Glavin, which was heading wide, to turn it low past the keeper at the back post. Minutes later, Alfie Conn, subjected to a relentless barrage of abuse by the Rangers fans, was denied a goal by the woodwork. Ian Wood wrote in The Scotsman of the 21st of March 1977, "Such was the feelings that boiled among the ranks massed in a sweep of blue, red and white on the Rangers terracing, that it's disturbing to think what might have occurred had this errant son of Ibrox scored with his wonderful bending shot in the 15th minute instead of hitting a post with Stuart Kennedy nowhere." Conn himself was so sure that the shot was a scorer that he turned away before it actually struck the woodwork. Certainly, quite apart from the point of view of crowd reaction, a goal then would have changed the complexion of the game, for Celtic had scored 3 minutes earlier and were calling most of the play. Derek Parley equalised for Rangers on 22 minutes, and the same player looked to have won the match for the home side 11 minutes from time, when he slid home his second, Peter Latchford injuring his ankle in the attempt to save it. At this, trouble broke out on the Celtic terracing, bottles and cans being lobbed from the back onto those below, and fans spilling onto the track to escape the mayhem behind them. Jim Reynolds wrote in the Glasgow Herald of the 21st of March 1977, "The match was held up for about 5 minutes as the police and Jock Stein moved the fans back onto the terracing, and Neil Mockin attended to Latchford, badly injured in attempting to prevent the goal. After order was restored and Latchford hobbled back onto his line in agony, Celtic hit back in champion fashion." The masked Rangers choir behind Stuart Kennedy's goal were in full voice, scarves held aloft in triumph, as Johnny Doyle drove a low free kick along the 18-yard line from the right, and the scarves promptly disappeared as Roy Aitken smashed a volley high past the keeper to rescue a point for the league leaders. The drama wasn't quite over as Rangers came forward again and John Gregg released a howitzer of a shot that looked destined for the top corner, until the hobbling Peter Latchford pulled out a tremendous one-handed stop. A minute later, Kennedy pulled out almost as good a save to deny Joe Craig a late winner for Celtic. It had been a remarkable game. Jim Reynolds reported, "Rangers and Celtic showed on Saturday that Scottish football at its best is still the best 70 pence worth in the sporting world. The two Glasgow rivals served up the finest Old Firm match in years. A game that sent the pulses racing and left everyone limp from excitement at the end." The draw at Ibrox ended any lingering hopes Rangers may have harboured of fighting their way back into the title race, and 1 week later, after a 2-0 win at home over closest challengers Dundee United, leaving them 5 points ahead with a game in hand, it was only a matter of time until the title was secured. The Sunday Post headline the following day reading, "It's all over bar the shouting." The title should have been clinched at Fir Park on Wednesday the 13th of April, with only a draw required to make it official. But in a nervy performance all round, 2 own goals by the unfortunate Andy Lynch in the final 5 minutes helped Motherwell to a 3-0 win. And so it was 3 days later, the title was clinched with a 1-0 win at Easter Road. In a petty and vindictive move, Hibs chairman Tom Hart decided at this point in the season that there was too much coverage of football on television and it was hurting the game, so banned the TV cameras from the ground, and would not even allow the Celtic Cine Club to film the game, or even be in the away dressing room after the game to film the celebrations. The goal-scoring hero on the day was Joe Craig, at last finding the net after a nervy first hour. Doug Bailey reported in the Sunday Post of the 17th of April 1977, "It duly arrived, and I'm delighted to report it was Andy Lynch, who had rather an unfortunate time of it at Fir Park on Wednesday, who set the ball in motion. Andy's delicate chip allowed Ronnie Glavin to get himself some space in which to work. Ronnie rapped his shot off the post. While the defence were running around in ever-decreasing circles, searching for the ball, Conn had everything under control. Alfie had it all to himself on the far byline, but he didn't keep hold of it too long. He rolled the ball inside, and Joe Craig rammed it into the net from a couple of metres. Up went the bunnets, up went the scarves, round terracing went the beer cans, and the shout was, 'Celtic! Celtic! Celtic!' You can bet all the money you like, Joe won't forget that one in a hurry." It was Celtic's first title since the introduction of the 10-team Premier Division, and the 10th of Jock Stein's reign since his arrival 12 years before. It was won at a canter in the end, and bogey team Aberdeen were thrashed 4-1 at Celtic Park in a championship party 2 days later. But even in this moment of triumph, the seeds of disaster had been sown, and Stein would have a tense conversation with Captain Kenny Dalglish in the Easter Road dressing room after the game. Dalglish's contract was up, and he was refusing to sign a new one. Archie Macpherson writes in Jock Stein, the definitive biography, "As his contract lay there unsigned, and after Celtic had clinched the title on the 16th of April, when Joe Craig scored the only goal of the game at Easter Road against Hibernian, Stein had a confrontation with Dalglish, as his former player recalled. He told me he would have to inform the SFA that I was an unsigned player. He was right, of course, given that I wanted to play in the final against Rangers. He knew I wanted that badly. I didn't want to let the support down. Whatever I felt about my own ambitions, I still loved the support and all that they had given me, and I wanted to win that cup. So I signed." Stein, of course, was technically correct. An out-of-contract player had to be registered 14 days before taking part in the competition. But you cannot avoid the impression that coercion was involved. He wanted the player for the final and had laid down the gauntlet. but it might have lain in the back of his mind that once pen had been put to paper, he might have tamed Dalglish. If there had been subterfuge attached to that, it certainly did not work on the steely defiance of Dalglish. He may have signed a new contract, but Dalglish was far from settled and had no intention of quietly accepting he was morally bound to honour a deal he had signed only to allow him to play in the Scottish Cup final. The first Scottish Cup final to be televised live was the 1955 final between Celtic and Clyde, but none were shown live after that until the 1977 final, for what was expected to draw a 70,000 plus crowd to Hampden. That amount of tickets were certainly sold before the final, but driving rain on the day, combined with live coverage on both BBC Scotland and STV, saw the attendance barely reach 54,000, which was the lowest attendance at a Scottish Cup final in over half a century. The Glasgow Herald reported on the 9th of May 1977, "The SFA stated that 70,000 tickets were sold, and it can only be assumed that 16,000 people decided to forsake their privileged place at the ground for a seat in the living room. It would be difficult to blame them on an afternoon when the elements were comparable with those suffered by yachtsmen rounding the Cape. But the frightening thought is that if the weather, plus the TV, can combine to produce the lowest final attendance in post-war history, what would that combination have done to, for example, a Hearts-Dundee final? It may be that the rain and wind did the damage on Saturday, but I wonder how many of the missing 16,000 would have still carried on to Hampden had the TV alternative not been available." It turned out to be a deadly dull final for the neutrals, the Glasgow Herald match report being headlined "Drawing Board Victory," as both teams cancelled each other out in what was seen by at least some as an engrossing tactical battle. Celtic were hampered by a thigh injury Ronnie Glavin sustained on the 27th of April in his one and only Scotland appearance, a 3-1 win over Sweden at Hampden, in which Joe Craig famously scored for Scotland before he'd kicked a ball for his country, heading in after coming on as a late substitute. Glavin had already scored 25 goals that season, and his injury severely disrupted Celtic's plans. Joe Edfordson was brought in as his replacement, while Paul Wilson, who had a great record against Rangers, was preferred in attack to Johnny Doyle. Missing the flair and drive of Glavin, Celtic adopted a more cautious approach, Mike Aitken writing in The Scotsman of the 9th of May 1977. "Having lost Ronnie Glavin from the midfield, Stein changed the whole pattern of the Celtic play rather than look for a direct replacement. It may not have been good to look at, but it was effective and gave Celtic their 25th success in the Scottish Cup." Afterwards, Jock Stein admitted, "The loss of Glavin upset us a wee bit. It was a change we didn't want, so we had to switch things round. Edvaldson came in to do a very good job, giving Derek Johnston hardly a single chance throughout the match." Hugh Taylor in the Daily Record of the 9th of May 1977 wrote that it was a final that would not be remembered, mainly because of Stein's enforced tactical change, and picked out the performance of Roddy McDonald as key. Celtic won the Cup because they won the Battle of Wits, and because Rangers couldn't spring a surprise move when it was obvious that their favourite tactic was failing. The accurate high crosses of Tommy McLean to the heads of Derek Parlane and Derek Johnston. That they failed was because centre-half Roddy McDonald was superb, commanding in defence and venomous in attack. Well, they still say an Old Firm game is the greatest in the world. Not in cup finals it isn't. MacDonald was now eliciting comparisons with Billy McNeil, and he was heavily involved in the one incident in the final that is remembered. The penalty scored by Andy Lynch after 20 minutes that proved the only goal of the game. Rangers protested fiercely when it was awarded, but most of the pressmen agreed it looked like Derek Johnston handled the ball on the line, following a corner taken by Alfie Conn. Mike Aitken reported in The Scotsman, "The outswinging ball was met by Roddy McDonald, winning everything he went for in the air at the far post. Kennedy tried to smother the effort, but was harassed by the thundering Edvardsson, who in turn managed a point-blank effort which Derek Johnston palmed off the line. It looked a penalty to referee Bob Valentine, and I think he made the right decision. Ronnie Glavin had taken over from Kenny Dalglish as the regular penalty taker, and it was expected Dalglish would take the penalty this time, but he was not keen. A possible explanation for this is that in all his time at the club, Celtic never won a final in which Dalglish scored. This might possibly have been playing on his mind, but up stepped left-back Andy Lynch, who had won a penalty competition in training that week, but who had only taken 2 penalties in his career to that point, both for Hearts and both missed. Stuart Kennedy guessed correctly, but so well struck was Lynch's penalty, it gave him no chance. Very little of real note happened thereafter until late in the match, when Rangers substitute Chris Robertson hit the bar with a header and Celtic could twice have added to their lead. Mike Aitken reported, "Joe Craig had 2 good chances to increase Celtic's lead. In 68 minutes, looking a yard offside, he went clear of the Rangers' defence and muffed the shot wide with only Kennedy to beat. Then a minute later, the move of the match was set up by Conn and McGrain down the right. Paul Wilson completely missed the cross, then the chance came to Craig, and Kennedy had to produce the best save of the afternoon."
Now Alfie Conn. Here's McGrain, beautiful move by McGrain. And Conn and Wilson. And Craig, what a save. Celtic really should have put it away. Joe Craig again. It was that break by McGrain coming right across. 3 players had the chance. And finally Joe Craig, and what's a wonderful save. And somehow or other they scrambled it away.
The League and Scottish Cup double was confirmation that Jock Stein had once again taken Celtic to the top of Scottish football after 2 years of despair, and his rebuilding of the team promised even better things to come. The shattering loss of Kenny Dalglish in August is usually seen as the cause of the utter collapse in form of season 1977-78. But was there any chance that the team might have survived his loss? The events of the close season in 1977 suggest that quite possibly the loss of Dalglish could have been absorbed, as it became impossible to conceal from the supporters that all was not well between the club and its talismanic superstar captain. Following the end of the club season, Dalglish, along with Danny McGrain, played for Scotland in the home internationals and also toured South America with the national side, playing matches against Chile, Argentina and Brazil. Dalglish scoring in a 4-2 win over Chile and a 1-1 draw against Argentina. Shortly after their return, Celtic set out on a tour of Singapore and Australia. But on their departure, Kenny remained at home. Hugh Taylor reported in the Daily Record of the 9th of July 1977, "Kenny Dalglish, Celtic's golden boy, was at the centre of a football mystery yesterday. He walked out of the club's 6-match tour of Singapore and Australia. As the party flew from Glasgow Airport, Kenny was at home with his wife and 2 children. His place in the 17-strong pool was taken by young Jim Casey. There was no comment from either Dalglish or Celtic manager Jock Stein, and the soccer world is speculating on why Dalglish refused to go. Undoubtedly, Dalglish has had an arduous season. He captained Celtic to the double of Premier League and Scottish Cup, played in the home championships and went on Scotland's South American tour. But so did colleague Danny McGrain, who will now be Celtic's captain in the Far East. There will be a top-level discussion when Celtic return from Australia in 2 weeks. If the position is not resolved, it could lead to a transfer rush for Dalglish, who has been capped 47 times for Scotland. Liverpool, with £500,000 in the kitty after selling Kevin Keegan to Hamburg, could be in the bidding. The tour saw Celtic take part in 2 successive tournaments alongside Arsenal and Red Star Belgrade, billed as the World of Soccer Cup. In Singapore, it took the form of knockout matches followed by a final, with a Singapore select providing the fourth team, while an Australia select completed the lineup in Australia, the teams playing a round-robin group stage, the top two playing off in the final for the World of Soccer Cup trophy. In the opening match on the 12th of July 1977, Red Star Belgrade defeated Arsenal 3-1 after extra time, with the conditions presenting a major problem for all the European teams. Alfie Conn was quoted in the Daily Record of the 13th of July 1977. "It is incredibly humid out here. Yesterday it rained and it was 80 degrees. We were sweating just watching the match between Red Star and Arsenal." That evening, an experimental Celtic side, with a three-man forward line of Paul Wilson, Bobby Lennox and Alfie Conn, defeated the host team 5-0, which proved a bigger hit with the locals than the slow-paced Red Star-Arsenal match, which had seen them booed off the field at the end. Hugh Taylor reported in the Daily Record of the 14th of July 1977, "Despite the humid heat, Celtic played with style and pace," said Alfie Conn, who scored 2 goals. "In Singapore, everyone expects a languid waltz of a game. That seems to be the only way to beat the heat. But we surprised a good team with quick bursts." 2 goals from Conn, plus strikes from Joe Edfordson, Tommy Burns and Bobby Lennox, put Celtic through for the first of a series of meetings with Red Star Belgrade in the final. In 90-degree heat, Celtic went down to a 3-1 defeat against a Red Star team clearly taking the tournament very seriously. Hugh Taylor wrote in the Daily Record of the 18th of July 1977, "What went wrong? The Celts, according to the boss, fell down in midfield where nothing went right after Petrovic opened the scoring for Red Star in 20 minutes. Up till then, Celtic had been playing well and craftily, but the goal, the result of a defensive error, brought worries and lifted the Yugoslavs. Worse was to come for Celtic. The usually reliable Pat Stanton put through his own net to make it 2-0 for Red Star, and there was no way Celtic could come back against this cool, collected team. As always, Red Star played it hard, and Susic was ordered off in the second half for persistent fouling. That didn't help Celtic, however, for Popavoda made it 3-0 when the Yugoslavs were playing with only 10 men. Bobby Lennox scored a late consolation from the penalty spot on 87 minutes, and Red Star picked up the Metro 20th Anniversary Cup. Celtic flew out for Australia the following day, and Ronnie Glavin, speaking to Alan Davidson for the Evening Times of the 18th of July, claimed Red Star's first and third goals had been offside, and was looking forward to meeting them again in the Australian leg of the tour. We're naturally disappointed, but certainly not downhearted, because we have an early opportunity to grab revenge. We fly to Australia later today, and on Thursday meet Red Star again. We'll be going all out to reverse yesterday's scoreline." Celtic met Red Star again in the Melbourne Olympic Stadium on Thursday the 21st of July 1977, in a match that shows neither side were approaching the game as a mere friendly. In the much cooler setting of midwinter in southeastern Australia, Celtic put in a much improved performance as they adopted a more cautious approach against the slick Yugoslavs. The Glasgow Herald reported on the 23rd of July 1977, "They outplayed Red Star for long spells, and but for careless finishing, would have amply avenged the 3-1 defeat they suffered at the hands of the Yugoslavs in Singapore last week." Alfie Conn explained in that day's Daily Record, "We played it tight, filtered back whenever we lost possession and hit on the break. We outplayed them at their own game and should have won decisively." Despite the impressive showing, it looked as though Red Star had won again when they scored on 83 minutes. But a few minutes later, Celtic equalised. The Glasgow Herald reporting, "In the event, it took a scrambled goal from Roddy McDonald 2 minutes from time to level the scores. Alfie Conn chipped over a cross, Johannes Edvaldsen knocked the ball on, and McDonald forced it home." Alfie Conn, in that day's Daily Record, had a different perspective on the late equaliser. "It would have been a travesty if we had not equalised. It was particularly pleasing to Mr. Stein that we did so from a set piece we have been practising out here. The move worked perfectly. Even with only 2 minutes remaining, the drama was not over, with thousands of expat Scots fans roaring for a final push for a winner. Pat Stanton was punched by Red Star's Busko Lukic, and he responded by landing a punch of his own on his assailant, resulting in both players being sent off. With Arsenal surprisingly losing to Australia in their first match, the draw against Red Star saw Celtic feeling optimistic of finishing in the top two and reaching the final of the tournament, especially with no suspension facing Stanton for his ordering off as they flew to Sydney for their meeting with Arsenal at the Sydney Cricket Ground on the 24th of July 1977. Celtic played even better than they had in the Red Star match, sweeping into a 3-1 half-time lead against the English First Division side. The Daily Express reported on the 25th of July 1977, Paul Wilson was the Parkhead wizard in those 45 magic minutes. His fancy footwork and deadly finishing put Celtic 2 up with superb goals in the 6th and 20th minutes. Arsenal pulled one back through a penalty from Malcolm MacDonald on 30 minutes, but Celtic went straight back into attack and were awarded a penalty of their own a minute later, which Ronnie Glavin converted. The Daily Express wrote, Wilson continually caused problems in the Arsenal defence, and bearded skipper Danny McGrain, directing the one-way traffic in majestic fashion, kept Celtic on the attack. With the wind behind them in the second half, Arsenal improved, and after Pat Rice pulled one back, saw a Liam Brady shot cleared off the line by Pat Stanton. But Celtic held on to record the win, and now knew a win over Australia in their final group match would see them safely into the final. The match against Australia on the 26th of July 1977 was more difficult than expected, Celtic falling 2-1 behind in the first half after Joe Edfordson had given them a 3rd-minute lead. But Shuggy scored again just before half-time, and the winner was scored early in the second half by Ronnie Glavin, as Jock Stein fielded an experimental line-up in preparation for the European Cup campaign. Ken Gallagher reported in the Daily Record of the 27th of July 1977, Stein has used formations which he may use again in Europe, and the match against the Australian All-Star select was no exception. Pat Stanton played as a sweeper behind a back four of Danny McGrain, Roddy McDonald, Johannes Edvaldsen and Tommy Burns. Ronnie Glavin, Roy Aitken and Alfie Conn were in midfield, with Paul Wilson and John Doyle up front. Peter Latchford was in goal. Celtic now had to wait to find out their opponents in the final, as Arsenal beat Red Star in their match, and this left Australia requiring only a draw to face Celtic again in the final. But Red Star duly defeated the host team, and the two sides met for the 3rd time in the final of the World of Soccer Cup. Back in Melbourne for the final, Celtic showed that even without Kenny Dalglish, they could still compete with continental opposition as they lined up Latchford, McGrain, Burns, Edvaldsen, MacDonald, Stanton, Conn, Wilson, Glavin, Aitken, Lennox. The Daily Record reported on the 1st of August 1977, Celtic produced the sort of cool display that makes Stein welcome the prospect of the European Cup in the new season. They went out to contain the Yugoslavs, did it magnificently, and then hit hard on the break. Despite having to soak up some heavy pressure in the opening 30 minutes, it was Celtic who made the real scoring chances even in that period. Celtic deservedly went in front just before half-time when an Alfie Conn corner kick landed on the crossbar, and when it dropped, Roddy McDonald scored his 2nd of the tour against Red Star, bundling the ball home from close range. Bobby Lennox was replaced by John Doyle with 25 minutes remaining, but the Daily Record reported, the change made no difference to the smooth-running Celtic machine. Lennox's withdrawal was a symptom of the bad feeling which had once again crept into the game, and shows both sides were taking the match much more seriously than a run-of-the-mill friendly. The Daily Express reported on the 1st of August 1977, Red Star were full of skill and not a little muscle. In fact, in only the 5th minute, referee Jack Taylor cautioned Dalglish for a particularly nasty foul on Conn. That started the needle, and it never really stopped. Edvaldsen was cautioned for kicking the ball away after fouling Savic. The fact that he had the referee dodging for cover might have had something to do with it. Lennox was next in trouble. After putting up with some rather crude attention from the Red Star defence, he lost his cool and took a swing with his boot at Dalglish, who had a flair for being where trouble was. Frankly, Lennox was lucky not to be sent off. Stein solved that problem by taking the little winger off himself and putting Doyle in his place. The win was sealed 9 minutes later, the Daily Record reporting, Wilson made a great run on the right, beating 2 defenders before crossing to the far post for Edvaldsen to score his 4th goal of the tour. Added Stein, that second goal clinched it, and we should have had more in the remaining time. It was the kind of performance that must make us look forward to the European Cup. The World of Soccer Cup proved to be the final trophy Jock Stein won as the manager of Celtic. And as they flew back into Glasgow with the trophy and a cheque for $36,000 Australian dollars on the 2nd of August, the club was bursting with optimism for the new season. The Daily Record reported on the 1st of August 1977. At the end, an overjoyed Jock Stein said, The money isn't important. What counts is the trophy, the prestige and the benefit to the players for the season ahead. Young lads such as Tommy Burns, Roy Aitken and Roddy McDonald have had a magnificent tour. They will come home better players and they will be ready for the challenges we face in Scotland and Europe. I have mentioned these lads only because they have grown up out here, but today was a wonderful team effort. Stein also praised skipper Danny McGrain, who had almost missed the match with a knee knock, but he played and played magnificently. The Celtic boss enthused, What can I say about Danny? He has come out here and carried on where he left off at home. We cannot fail with players like him around. And remember, we have beaten class opposition here without Joe Craig, Andy Lynch and Kenny Dalglish. I am delighted. It may have been significant that Dalglish was the last named of the 3 players who had not played on the tour. And while it may have provided evidence that Celtic could be successful without their captain and talisman, his immediate future was an ominous dark cloud on the horizon, even as Celtic basked in the sunshine of their World of Soccer Cup win. A smiling Jock Stein, the proud grandfather, was photographed on the front page of the Evening Times of the 2nd of August 1977, showing off the trophy to his grandson John. But on the back page, the Dalglish problem was coming into focus. Kenny Dalglish reported to Celtic Park today for training as the rest of the first team squad flew into Glasgow after a successful tour of the Far East and Australia. The Celtic international pin-up player now anticipates the club making a move after his shock stay-at-home stand. But Dalglish hasn't a meeting planned with manager Jock Stein today. For the past 2 weeks I've been keeping myself fit. Anyway, I wouldn't expect the boss to be in after such an exhausting flight. Dalglish described Celtic's Sunday Cup final win over Red Star, Yugoslavia, in Melbourne as a great result and said that he was delighted for the team. However, his own position remains the Celtic talking point, although he refuses to say anything on the subject until the club make a statement. If the split isn't solved quickly, look for either Celtic putting Dalglish up for sale or the player asking for a transfer again. Either way, there will be a queue of clubs outside Celtic Park with money to spend. Dalglish's Scotland teammate Danny McGrain took over as captain on the tour, and he is tipped to keep the job this season, regardless of the Dalglish-Celtic outcome. There was feverish speculation in the press over the next week, but little definite news from either Celtic or Dalglish himself. As late as Sunday the 7th of August, Dalglish contributed a column in the Sunday Post in which he predicted Celtic would win the Premier Division again, and giving no indication he would not be part of the side. We won the Premier League last season because we were the best and most consistent side in Scotland. Simple as that. Consistency is the key to it all. Turning in sound displays week after week. That's not as easy as it sounds, because if just one player has an off day, that can upset things. Nevertheless, I feel we have the right blend of young and not so young for a same-again season, with, of course, a successful run in Europe as well. But it won't be easy to make it 2 in a row in the Premier League, for I expect the teams which played it tight against us last time will play it even tighter this season. That's my biggest complaint with the setup. Most other sides, unlike Celtic, don't have enough faith in themselves to throw men forward and have a go. As a result, goals are hard to come by, and that's what the fans don't want. While the player was giving nothing away publicly, behind the scenes, he was adamant that he wanted to leave, and had been for most of the previous season. Archie Macpherson in Jock Stein, the definitive biography, suggests this had led to strained relations between manager and player. But the personal relationship was now at a low ebb, with Dalglish sticking in his heels to leave the club, despite having signed the contract. He had known all along that Liverpool were heavily in for him. Still, like many of the Celtic players I have talked to, he recounts his leaving Celtic Park with decidedly mixed feelings. He knew, and I knew, that contract I had signed before the final wasn't worth the paper it was written on. It was signed for practical reasons. However, he still pushed me to go with the team to Australia to play in a tournament there after the final. I told Jock I didn't want to go. He argued with me about that for a spell. Then one morning I got a call from him saying he had decided not to take me because he only wanted players who really did want to play for the club. On Celtic's return from Australia, Kenny played and scored in a reserve friendly against Stirling Albion at the aptly named Anfield on the 5th of August, and 4 days later played for Celtic for the final time in a 4-1 friendly win over Dunfermline at East End Park on the 9th of August 1977. The following morning's Daily Record printed a haunting photo of Jock Stein watching forlornly at the top of the steps down to the pitch as Dalglish trots out, wearing the green and white hoops for the last time. After the match that evening, a delegation from Liverpool arrived at Celtic Park, and sometime around midnight, Dalglish signed for the European champions, who had £500,000 burning a hole in their pocket from the sale of Kevin Keegan to Hamburg earlier that summer. The Daily Record reported on the 10th of August 1977, Kenny Dalglish last night became Britain's most expensive player when he joined Liverpool for £400,000. The deal was clinched at Parkhead when Celtic skipper Dalglish met Anfield boss Bob Paisley just before midnight. Earlier in the day, Liverpool had contacted Celtic manager Jock Stein and made their offer for the player. It was discussed by the Parkhead board, and Paisley travelled north for late-night talks with them. Stein, Chairman Desmond White and other board members left Dunfermline, where Celtic had just played, in a car dash back to Glasgow. They met Paisley and Dalglish was called into the talks. After a short meeting, Paisley convinced the Celtic and Scotland star that he was the man to take over the role left vacant by Kevin Keegan's £500,000 sale to West German club SV Hamburg. Ken Gallagher's report concluded, Dalglish will travel south today to meet his new teammates at Anfield. Last night he told me, I can still hardly believe it. Everything has happened so quickly. Obviously, I'm sad to leave Celtic, but this is the kind of move no one could turn down. Speaking to Archie Macpherson for Jock Stein, the definitive biography, in 2004, Dalglish remembered the transfer slightly differently almost 30 years later. I was still officially the club captain, and we were in the dressing room just before the game when Jock started to talk to us and finished up by turning to Danny McGrain and saying, Right Danny, lead the boys onto the park. He didn't say a word to me. That's when I knew I was finished. But I handed it to him. The following morning, I got a call to say he would drive me personally down to Moffat, just over the main road to the border, where I would meet Bob Paisley and the Liverpool chairman, John Smith. That's what he did. We drove down, met those two men, agreed to transfer and shook hands on it. But before he left me that day, he suddenly grabbed me in a big bear hug and just said, "Good luck, you wee bugger." It was affectionate, and I felt quite moved by it. The departure of Kenny Dalglish was devastating for both the club and the fans, many of whom, almost 50 years later, still can't quite believe how it was allowed to happen. Celtic made every effort to keep the player, but he was determined to leave, feeling that Celtic could no longer help him meet his ambitions of being a European Cup winner, and in that, at least, he was correct. Maybe if Macari, Hay and Connolly had still been at the club, things would have been different. The double win of the previous season suggested that Celtic were on the up again, and the side would have been immeasurably better if those three outstanding talents had been retained. It's far from fanciful to suggest Celtic might have won the European Cup again if Stein's Quality Street Gang project had come to fruition. The loss of Dalglish was the final confirmation that Celtic was no longer a club that could keep its best players when the big money clubs south of the border came calling, and it happened at the worst possible time. The success in Australia gives us a glimpse of what a Celtic team without Kenny Dalglish might have looked like in season 1977-78. Diminished as any team would have been without him, but by no means reduced to mid-table mediocrities. There was also the small matter of a huge cheque from Liverpool, which was beyond the wildest dreams of the Celtic board, who had been prepared to accept their initial bid of only £300,000 for the best footballer in Britain. Jock Stein horrified the board by turning it down flat, but they were overjoyed when Liverpool came up with a fee that was only £60,000 short of the sum they received for Keegan. What the directors didn't know was that the Merseyside club were prepared to go even higher. When Stein tried to turn down their £440,000 bid, the board took fright and overruled him. While Stein could still drive a hard bargain, the sale of Dalglish came at a time when he was increasingly feeling the strain of the job. The Jock Stein of 1972, before he had his health scare in December that year, might have relished the challenge of picking the club up from the shock of Dalglish's departure. But the Stein of 1977, recovered at least physically from the injuries sustained in that horrific car crash in 1975, was no longer fully equipped for the task. Tom Campbell and Pat Woods write in Dreams and Songs to Sing, A New History of Celtic. The palpable sense of disintegration posed questions about the manager's sense of judgment and powers of motivation. Several people close to him, including his friend Tony Queen, a well-known Glasgow bookmaker, and a passenger in the car crash 2 years before, feel that the accident in 1975 had taken more out of Stein, mentally and physically, than the manager would ever admit. The change in his manner was striking. After his convalescence, Jock Stein would be a less dominating personality, a figure robbed of the vital edge that had made him a manager supreme. How could Celtic have replaced Kenny Dalglish? As Stein himself was reported to have said, "It's all right saying we've got £400,000, but where do you find any player like him?" The short answer to that rhetorical question is, you don't. Kenny Dalglish remains, 40 years after his retirement, the greatest footballer Scotland ever produced, and no one in the meantime has even come close. Archie Macpherson writes that Stein signed Alfie Conn with one eye already on Dalglish's possible departure, but as good a player as Alfie was, he was no Dalglish. There was decent talent in Scotland if Celtic had been willing to spend the kind of sums that would be required. 20-year-old Paul Sturrock was emerging as a promising talent at Dundee United, while Frank McGarvey, also 20 years old, had fired Alex Ferguson's St Mirren to the Premier Division with 17 goals the previous season. Another possible target might have been yet another 20-year-old, Dundee's Gordon Strachan, who would sign for Billy McNeil's Aberdeen in October 1977. Another player who might have gone some way to filling Dalglish's boots could even have already been at the club in August 1977. Billy McNeill had not intended to get involved in management when he retired in 1975, but he was persuaded to accept the Clyde job when it was offered to him in early 1977, and during his short spell there recommended Steve Archibald, who would later play for Spurs and Barcelona, to Celtic. He writes in his autobiography, Hail Caesar, of his regret at not taking Archibald to Aberdeen straight away when he left Clyde. Steve was this very interesting character who could play centre-half, left midfield, outside right or centre-forward. I was so impressed, in fact, that when Jock Stein asked if we had any players at Clyde who I considered capable of doing a decent job for Celtic, I urged him to sign Archibald. I knew Clyde were in desperate need of funds and had no hesitation in recommending Archibald. I admitted that I wasn't sure what Archibald's best position was, but Jock had already seen him play and wasn't entirely convinced. None of the players mentioned could have replaced Dalglish on their own, but Celtic could have bought all of them with the fee they received for Dalglish. Unfortunately, the drive and determination seemed to have deserted Jock Stein when he most needed it. Tom Campbell and David Potter write in Jock Stein, The Celtic Years, of the days and weeks after Dalglish's departure. But the weeks were passing and there were no signs of action. The directors were puzzled, particularly in view of the manager's performance at a board meeting. Apparently, Stein had entered the room briskly and gave every impression of being the vibrant personality of old, positive and cheerful and radiating confidence. He informed the directors that he had been rethinking matters after the departure of Dalglish and that he was considering buying 3 players from Scottish clubs. One director at that meeting, Kevin Kelly, recalls being delighted with the announcement. All 3 named were outstanding performers, exciting players, men who could have done much to reconcile the fans to the loss of Dalglish. The board wholeheartedly approved the manager's wishes and gave permission for the negotiations to proceed. Weeks passed, but there was no movement on the transfer front. Kevin Kelly remembers coming back from a holiday and phoning another director to ask about progress. The other man told him that there had been no further word about the transfers. Even without Dalglish, Celtic were still the bookies' favourites to win the title for a second successive season. But a club in shock was plunged into full-blown crisis by the events of the opening league match of the season, a 0-0 draw against Dundee United on the 13th of August 1977, in which for the first time the Celtic 4-leaf clover badge appeared on the hoop jersey, a move not altogether appreciated by the traditionalists among the support. A double injury blow for Celtic, ran the headline in the Evening Times match report that day, in what was a monumental understatement. Shortly before half-time, Alfie Conn was stretchered off with ankle ligament damage, while shortly after the break, Pat Stanton limped off with the knee injury that ended his career. After the unfurling of the league flag by Mrs. Jean Stein, the match quickly developed into a stalemate, with Celtic lacking the poise and composure to turn pressure into scoring opportunities. The seriousness of both injuries was not immediately apparent, especially Stanton's. Alex Cameron reported in the Daily Record of the 15th of August 1977, ahead of a friendly match against Chelsea. Celtic's Alfie Conn will go to hospital for a knee operation today. He will be out of action for a minimum of 6 weeks, a real blow to the Parkhead club. For minus Conn, following the transfer of Kenny Dalglish, Celtic are in a difficult position for home tournaments, never mind the European Cup, in which they hope to do well. Conn damaged cartilage playing against Dundee United at Parkhead in a goalless game. Ben Casey, 18, will take Pat Stanton's place in a friendly with Chelsea at Parkhead tonight, but the ex-Hibs man, who also had to come off on Saturday, needs only a few days' rest. Minus 2 of the most influential players in the squad, Celtic travelled to Somerset Park to face Ayr United the following Saturday, and went down to a 2-1 defeat in a match most remembered for a bizarre red card for Johnny Doyle. Kick-off had to be delayed 10 minutes to allow a huge crowd into the ground, and Joe Craig put Celtic into an early lead, firing home the rebound after the keeper failed to hold a Tommy Burns shot. But Walker McCall scored 2 scrappy goals in 3 second-half minutes to put Ayr ahead, the second going in when a Joe Edvaldson clearance from the goal line bounced off him and into the net. Celtic were desperately pushing for an equaliser. Alan Heron reported in the Sunday Mail of the 21st of August 1977. Celtic sub Johnny Doyle was sent off 6 minutes from the end of an incredible match as the champions crashed to defeat. With Celtic fighting desperately to save the match, ref Bob Cuthill blew for hands against Doyle on the left flank. The winger ignored the whistle and tried to hit the ball hard towards the Ayr goal. Instead, he hit the ref full in the face and knocked him out. After some attention from a linesman and the Ayr trainer, the groggy ref got to his feet, called Doyle over and sent him off. Bedlam was let loose. The Celtic players, led by skipper Danny McGrain, crowded round the ref and cans and bottles were thrown onto the pitch. Doyle refused to wait for a lecture. He ran straight off the park to the tunnel, where manager Jock Stein came out of the dugout to try to stop him. The former Ayr winger, transferred for £90,000 2 years ago, shook him off and disappeared to the dressing room. Worse was to come a week later, with a 1-0 defeat to Motherwell at Celtic Park, former Celt Vic Davidson hitting a spectacular 25-yard shot past Peter Latchford with 10 minutes remaining, while Celtic hit the woodwork 3 times and missed numerous chances. This was the first of 3 quick-fire matches against Motherwell, Celtic winning 4-2 on aggregate over the Steelmen in the new 2-legged League Cup knockout format over the next 10 days. 3 days after the 4-2 win at Fir Park on the 6th of September, Celtic finally went into the transfer market to spend roughly a quarter of the Dalglish fee on the double signing of Tom McAdam and former Rangers youth signing John Dowie. The Daily Record reported on the 7th of September 1977. Celtic yesterday swooped into the transfer market to spend nearly £100,000 on 2 players. Dundee United striker Tom McAdam joined the Parkhead side in a late-night deal for £60,000 and, more surprisingly, Anglo-Scot John Dowie, a former Ranger and Scotland youth player, was bought from Fulham for £25,000. Said Celtic manager Jock Stein last night, "It's been a long day, but a satisfying one. We have bought 2 young players and it's up to them now to show us what they can do." McAdam was hardly a surprise. The man who was signed from Dumbarton for £40,000 had been the centre of the transfer rumour for days. The big shock was 21-year-old Dowie, who will be playing alongside another man who made his way to Parkhead via Ibrox and London, Alfie Conn. Dowie, a midfielder, travelled from London on Monday night and the deal went through smoothly. He said later, "It's all just a little too much to take in, especially when I look back at the time when I was freed by Rangers. I spent a year on an S-form, then had a season on the ground staff. I was Rangers daft and I regretted it that I didn't make it with them. But that part of my career is all forgotten now. I have signed for Celtic and I'm delighted." 4 days later, Celtic travelled to Ibrox in 8th place, with only a single point from 3 matches, to play a Rangers team in 7th place, having lost 2 of their first 3 games, winning only 1. Both new signings made their debuts, McAdam replacing Dowie as a second-half substitute in a match which dealt Celtic a huge psychological blow from which their season probably never recovered. It had all looked so promising for a Tommy Burns-inspired Celtic at half-time, as their most impressive showing since the summer tour saw them 2-0 ahead at the break, both goals scored by Johannes Edvaldson. Mike Aitken reported in the Scotsman of the 12th of September 1977. Celtic began well on Saturday, taking the lead in the 18th minute with a smartly worked goal. Tommy Burns, who was in good fettle throughout, sent Wilson clear. took the return pass and set up the opportunity for Edvaldsson to drive the ball home from close range. In 31 minutes, Edvaldsson scored again, and once more Burns was the creator, having shrugged off a Cooper tackle in his own half, running freely down the left before sending a long high ball into a perfect position for the big Icelander to head past the hesitant McCloy. Celtic seemed to have the game taped then, and Jock Stein said afterwards that perhaps his team thought it was all over at the interval. It wasn't, of course. Rangers began the match with Derek Johnston in defence and John Gregg on the bench, but Derek Parlane took a knock to his face in the opening minute, and by half-time had to be substituted with a fractured cheekbone. With Johnston moved up front and Gregg taking his place in defence, Rangers became much more dangerous in the second half, while Celtic underwent a catastrophic collapse. Goals from Gordon Smith and Derek Johnston had dragged Rangers level after 65 minutes, but Celtic held on, with Peter Latchford making some tremendous saves, until he endured his own personal tragedy with 9 minutes remaining. Jim Reynolds reported in the Glasgow Herald of the 12th of September 1977, "Young Bobby Russell chipped a ball across from the byline. Peter Latchford appeared to have it covered, but let it slip through his fingers, and Smith was waiting on the goal line to prod it home." It was a tragedy for Latchford, who had a quite outstanding match up to that point, but it did give Rangers a victory they deserved. Defeat at Ibrox was a shattering blow, leaving Celtic with only 1 point from their opening 4 matches, and while it was to be expected that Kenny Dalglish would be missed, that didn't fully account for the shambolic start to the season. Jim Reynolds wrote in the Glasgow Herald, "Celtic have other class players in their squad, but the fact is, too many of them are not producing the goods. For Sherlock Holmes, read Jock Stein. And the big Celtic manager's most pressing case is the mystery of the vanishing men. Twice in the last 8 days, he has watched his team build up formidable leads. Remember, they were 3 up at Motherwell and lost 2 late goals, then fold up. Too many Celtic players faded in the second half at Ibrox, and the result was embarrassment for the club. Seldom have I seen so many players caught in possession, so slow in recovery, or so completely out of touch with what was going on around them."
McWilliams is up and it's there. Roddy McDonald right in on top of that. Glavin wants to chip across. There's Edvaldsson in. There's Wilson. Paul Wilson gets number 2. Free kick to Celtic. All anxious to get on with it. Can't get his shot in though. Roy Aitken. Glavin with a great shot. There must be. Joe Craig picks it. Number 3. 7.5 minutes gone.
The European Cup campaign got underway 4 days later with a 5-0 win over Jeunesse Esch, the 5th a brilliant finish from Brian McLaughlin, making one of his final appearances for the first team. But then another defeat to Billy McNeil's Aberdeen at Pittodrie on the 17th of September left Celtic joint bottom of the table ahead of Clydebank only on goal difference on 1 point. Their first league win of the season came in a bottom-of-the-table clash against the Bankies on the 24th of September 1977, Tom McAdam scoring his first goal for the club as they scraped a 1-0 win and moved into 8th place, leapfrogging ahead of Ayr United and out of the relegation zone only on goal difference. In the week before this win, Danny McGrain played in a World Cup qualifier for Scotland at Hampden in a 3-1 win over Czechoslovakia, setting up a showdown against Wales at Anfield in October. It was a sobering thought for Celtic fans that when Scotland played a similarly vital World Cup qualifier against the Czechs at Hampden only 4 years before, there had been 5 Celtic players in the starting 11. This time around, there had only been 1.
A little flick for Hartford. A touch on for Jordan, and here's Hartford through again. Pollack after him.
The month of October 1977 started brightly for Celtic, as their best performance of the season so far saw them defeat Hibernian 3-1 at Celtic Park. Tommy Burns again the attacking inspiration. Ian Paul in the Glasgow Herald of the 3rd of October 1977 described their play as sparkling and picked out Burns for special praise. A good deal of that sparkle emanated from Tommy Burns, who confirmed my view that he is potentially one of the best players in the country. Burns does the kind of job for Celtic that Don Masson accomplishes so magnificently for Scotland, and if he has a bit to go before reaching that standard, time is on his side. If he was inclined to be caught in possession, he more than made amends by laying on the 2 second-half goals which dispensed with Hibs' challenge. His pass to Tom McAdam, it travelled all of 40 yards, which led to the 3rd goal, was one of those moments which lifts this fascinating game to an art form. "You don't get many passes like that," said Stein yesterday, displaying exceptional talent for understatement. With Tommy Burns emerging as a rare talent, there were hopes Celtic's form slump would prove to have been only temporary, especially with encouraging news on the injury front. Paul concluded his match report with an update on Conn and Stanton. Meanwhile, Alfie Conn, who wanted to play for a spell against Hibs reserves at Easter Road, will probably be in the team to face Stirling University in a friendly match at the campus on Wednesday afternoon. Pat Stanton is out of hospital after his cartilage operation, but it will be some time before he returns to action. A certain feel-good factor may have been in the air, but what none of the newspapers that weekend even mentioned was that Danny McGrain had sustained an ankle injury that would keep him out of football for almost 18 months. He remembers in his autobiography, In Sunshine or in Shadow, written with Hugh Keevins, "John Blackley of Hibs was a close personal friend when we played against each other at Celtic Park on the 1st of October 1977. I should make it clear he still is as well. Because of that friendship, I did not draw back, and neither did he, when we fought for a 50-50 ball on the edge of Hibs' penalty box. On reflection, I don't even know what I was doing that far up the park. But I do remember only too well how much I felt every step of the way back up to the other end after our collision. The pain was quite something. But, again because of our relationship, I tried not to show it, since I did not want Sloop, as he is known to everybody, to see I had felt his challenge. When I finally looked back and saw he was lying on the ground receiving treatment, I decided he had come off worst in any case." This was the all-time classic error of judgment. McGrain completed the match and felt no reaction to the injury afterwards. It was only on Monday morning, when he awoke with a shooting pain on the base of his foot, that he became aware anything was amiss. It grew steadily worse as the week wore on, and eventually he was sent for x-rays, which proved inconclusive. Just as with Pat Stanton, the seriousness of the injury was not realised for some time. But as the weeks wore on, with no sign of a return to action or even a definitive diagnosis of what the problem actually was, it became apparent that the injury was a career-threatening one. Now, for Celtic, the bad times were about to really begin. There's enough evidence from the summer tour of Australia and the opening period of the season that the loss of Kenny Dalglish on its own should not have seen Celtic fall apart so spectacularly. They had beaten an impressive Red Star Belgrade team in Australia and shown in flashes on their return that they were still a capable side. Any team in Britain would have been diminished by Dalglish's exit, but Celtic could have survived it. What they could not survive was the loss of Dalglish, Conn, Stanton and McGrain in quick succession. Conn would play again that season, but a string of niggling injuries curtailed his appearances as well as his effectiveness when he was available. Pat Stanton would never play a competitive match again, while Danny McGrain would not play another league match until March 1979. The heart of his team had been ripped out, And Jock Stein, severely diminished himself by the car accident 2 years before, cut an increasingly forlorn figure as it disintegrated around him, and the season hurtled relentlessly towards the utter desolation of May 1978.